professoring, researching, authoring, consulting, not only in curriculum theory, but also in design and development, democratic schooling, homeschooling, unschooling, ecology, the arts, spirituality, and Neohumanism. Dr. Kathleen is about all of these and more. She is a lover of frogs and tarantulas everywhere. I present Dr. Kathleen Kesson.
I'm Kathleen Kesson, and I was worried that I wouldn't get to look at you all when I was talking, so this is nice. I can actually look at myself on the screen. Donna asked me to talk a bit about what is Neohumanist education, and that's a bit daunting because I suspect that everyone in this room is about as familiar with Neohumanism as I am, and probably know a fair amount about Neohumanist education. So I won't spend a lot of time going over the basics. I think what I'll focus on is a couple of things. One is I think that we are entering kind of a new phase of Neohumanist education of this project. It's really been ongoing for 30 years. And the second, I'll share with you my sense of urgency, at least, about why this time is particularly ripe to put forth the ideas and some new ideas about Neohumanist education. So, our direction was set without a whole lot of details by Baba in this quote, and I'll read it in case some of you don't see as well as we might. When the underlying spirit of humanism is extended to everything, animate and inanimate, in this universe, I have designated this as Neohumanism. This Neohumanism will elevate humanism to universalism, the cult of love for all created beings in the universe. I think this is a pretty tall order, but it is the task that we were set. And while Sri Sarkar didn't discount the very real accomplishments of humanism, it really brought great progress, I think, to at least a portion of the human species. Philosophy, it's a very old philosophy from the 14th century, carried on through the Enlightenment to the present day, and has an enormous effect on what our conventional education looks like now. But he didn't discount humanism. He didn't say overthrow humanism. He said it needs to be extended. So it did release much of humanity, many people in humanity, from a stifling religion and opened up new horizons of human development. So, the values of humanism.
Change slide.
We need to buy a little clicker for Gurukula.
In a second.
So, the values of humanism. Obviously, the importance of rationalism. The Enlightenment brought a new period of
excuse me, I got a message from somebody online saying they can't hear anything.
Yeah, that's what we're fixing it.
Okay.
Scientific and technological development. It brought about the advent of human inquiry and self-reflection. So the human being sort of had a new conception of themselves as an individual. It inspired new values and human dignity. Are you trying to tell me something? It brought about an era of human rights, the ideals of democracy, if not the reality of it, a real belief in personal and social growth and progress, and increased tolerance for diversity. These are very aspirational ideals. We've had like 5 centuries to realize them, and I would suggest that they're very incompletely realized at this point. So, to the failings of humanism, which I think is the spark that lit the fire for Neohumanism. this idea of the individual and the importance of the human as being central has led to what a lot of people call human exceptionalism, this idea that we're really very special, and we are somewhat special in terms of language and cognition and skyscrapers and time travel and all that. But it has led to this sense of the human having mastery and control over nature rather than being part of nature. So this idea of dominance is very important. Capitalism emerged with industrialism and with the scientific revolution as an organizing economic framework, and I think we can all see the point that capitalism has served to mobilize resources very nicely, but it has also put power, privilege, and capital in the hands of a very few people who are sort of deciding the fate of the earth. Colonialism was a major factor in humanism. The idea that a very few Northern European countries saw most of the rest of the world as less than human. They were not part of the humanist ideology, and so felt that it was all right to hunt, to enslave, to commit genocide, to steal land, etc. And that has resulted, we're sort of in a post-colonial era now, but what we now have is a kind of economic imperialism, the control of the global economy by a few corporations and very powerful interests. And Max Weber, a sociologist 100 years ago, talked about the disenchantment of the world that came with the Enlightenment and with science and with technology. This idea that when we believe that materialist science can answer all questions, what leaves the planet is magic, mystery, intuition, spirituality, the realm of really the higher koshas, the aesthetic, and what we're left with is kind of a positivist science that believes it can explain everything, but actually does not come close to explaining the important things. So, next slide. So, the present moment. And not to paint too gloomy of a picture, but things are really falling apart. I live in Vermont, which has always been sort of the safe haven from climate change. And I just witnessed from my little hill on the granite hillside, the towns below me become completely devastated. Thousands of businesses, thousands of homes, hundreds of businesses, almost 1,000 businesses, absolutely destroyed by floodwaters. So there is no safe haven. We have entered what many scholars are calling the Anthropocene. You've probably heard that word. It's an epoch in which the human impact on the earth is now leaving a new geologic strata. So we have entered a new phase. We had 10,000 years of the Holocene that was relatively stable. Obviously, it wasn't a perfect world. There were conflicts and clashes and disasters, but it was relatively stable climate-wise. Species extinction at hundreds a day. I think we all know this. It's nothing new. The pollution, what I call ecocide, the killing of the planet. There's obviously global conflict going on, the threat of nuclear war, battles over religious ideology, territory, racism, etc. And humanity really is stuck in the sentiments that Sarkar talked about, the social sentiment, the geo-sentiment, the human sentiment. So that's the task of Neohumanist education, is to not give in to despair, which it would be very easy to do looking at all this, but to really look at the next slide, which is the task before us. I think the task that we were set is that we actually do face the final moment. I love this language, it's pretty urgent. The final moment of a critical juncture, and we have choices before us. The dawn of a glorious new era. I love that language. You know, the dawn of a new era is on one side and the worn out skeleton of the past on the other. So people have to adopt either one of these two. So in some ways, he's he's really setting the stage for I think it captures a sense of the polarization that's happening right now, but the necessity to choose. So despite the terrible things that are happening, next slide, I have some reasons for hope. And I try to stay in touch with global social movements. And I'm really just inspired, as I know many of you are that study this sort of thing. There's many, many, many dispersed movements challenging the dominant regime, contesting its roots in capitalism and patriarchy, in racism, in white supremacy, in statist, nationalistic, and anthropocentric forces. So there's an awful lot of stuff going on. I know I'm in a bubble in Vermont and all this stuff is happening up there, but it's happening everywhere in the world. And the new science of complexity is giving us a new story about the intelligence in the universe and the self-organizing capacity of the universe. And I'm also been reading a lot lately about a lot of new research into animal and plant intelligence, which I think is really going to help us understand it's not a sentimental love for all creation that we're after. It's that deep sense of connection and understanding ourselves as embedded and as species in all species as intelligent and self-organizing. So if we adopt this idea of a bright new era, then designing an education to cultivate the new human who will bring about the neo-humanism is of vital importance. So as Paulo Freire, a great Brazilian educator, talked about, he said that the education is never a neutral process, which much as people would try to get us to believe that teachers should be totally neutral and have no ideas of their own. It's always a political process. It either facilitates integration into the logic of the existing system, or it becomes the practice of freedom. So I would argue that neo-humanist education must become the practice of freedom, and everything that we do in education, from the culture of the school, to the hiring of the teachers, to the curriculum design, to the assessment of students, has to be oriented toward these hopes of the present moment and the desire to cultivate capacities in young people to meet the challenges of the present moment. So next slide, I think that this quote, if I have my order correctly here, it's coming. I know it's coming.
Is there an arrow on the left, Arun?
Or the up and down, the up and down arrow.
No, there's
Some of these have animation, so you have to like click a number of times to get it to move.
On the lower left corner, there's typically an arrow of the PowerPoint.
yeah, you can't see the PowerPoint program.
Usually it doesn't work because your cursor has to click on it someplace to tell it that it's using that program.
Okay, so this is a quote from Sarkar. The endeavor to advance toward the ultimate reality by forming a society free of all inequalities, with every one of the human race moving in unison, is called, and forgive my pronunciation, Samaj Tattva, a principle of social equality. We must totally reject hypocritical ideas that are contrary to this, and we must ideas which help human beings to be established in it. To me, what that says is that neo-humanist education can't exist in a silo with Prout in another silo over here. Those two, if neo-humanism really is about bringing about a new society, then it is necessary to really become fully integrated with the ideals of Prout, because he paid me to say that. No, because really, all education philosophy, all education ideals come from a vision of the future. If you don't have a vision of the future, you don't know what you're educating for. Our vision of the future right now in conventional schooling is that all kids will become, not all kids, just a fraction of kids will become productive workers in the global economy. And then of course we'll have millions of other people to take care of all the difficult, dirty work in the economy. So we're educating for capitalism right now, for productivity. So here's what gives me hope. I don't think Gurukula is alone. I think we're part of what there is something called a global tapestry of alternatives, mostly people from the global south that are almost seamlessly aligned with our ideas. But I wanted to talk about one thing in particular, which is I came across a report by a United Nations report, 2020, by UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. And they have published a report on the future of education, which is kind of visionary. They wrote it imagining it was 2050, and they were looking back to see what we did for education. And it was a group called the Common World Research Collective, an interdisciplinary group of researchers. And they were concerned with our relations with the more than human world. So in that visionary document, they put forth a number of declarations, which I'm going to share with you, because I got pretty excited about it.
I'm sorry, before you decide to go have some water.
I got very excited about it. Thank you, Donna. Because I think you'll begin to see the kind of seamless alignment with neo-humanist ideals. So if we can go to the next slide. Now, these may show up as animations one by one, so keep pressing buttons one at a time. One of their declarations is that we must preserve the best of humanism, justice, but extend it beyond the human. Now, did we say that? No, the United Nations said that. Next dot. That we must acknowledge that we are ecological, not just social beings. Next slide. That we need to cease promoting human exceptionalism while also accepting responsibility for the differential positioning and treatment of other species. In other words, that is why we're special, because we have more responsibility. We're the ones destroying the planet, not the eagles and not the snakes. It's us really destroying the planet. And the next one, that we need to discard conventional, individual, and social development frameworks in favor of fostering collective dispositions and convivial, reparative, human, and more than human relations. And I think this begins to address why communism was such a massive failure. I mean, they were trying to make everybody equal, but they didn't have a process in place for elevating consciousness to that place where we wanted a collective disposition. I think because of the planetary conditions right now, we're kind of realizing we need to develop that kind of collective disposition, and it's not imposed, it's internal. Next slide. There'll be a new slide now.
It's not going.
All right. This I love, that we need to learn to become with the world, not stand apart from it. Remember the human individual, apart from the world, objectivity, mastery, control. We need to learn to become with the world. The next one. That the spirit of universalism, here's that word, right? Isn't that our word? Must embrace, this one I think is incredibly important, must embrace multiple and diverse human worlds, as well as the multiplicity of our entanglements in multi-species ecologies. Now, Marco de Oliveira, Brazilian Margie, and I have written a paper recently, and we were struggling with this idea of universalism because in the past it has always meant kind of an imposed Western idea of universalism, which, posited the sort of European male as the sort of archetype of universalism. But we are calling for a diversified universalism in which you recognize the exceptionalism of all different species, all different people, but cultivate the universal sense of love and connection. Wow, one more. And that we need to adopt an ethics that is collective, more than human, and reparative. And I think that when I talk a little bit about our textbook that is about to be published for Neohumanist Education, ethics is at the center of curriculum design. Because I think that not a particular ethics, but a way to talk about ethics, to discuss it, and to make ethical decisions. And in fact, I have a chapter on STEAM, which is science, technology, engineering, math, and science. And I have reconceptualized it as science, technology, ethics, arts, and math, because I think ethics is the key. And that's the report. I suggest reading it in its entirety if you get a chance to. All right, next one. I hope I'm not going over time. Let me know. What I want to talk about is this United Nations report is aspirational. It's very theoretical, and it's important. But that said, I think that Neohumanist Education has something unique to offer it. Because the United Nations report sort of lacks the concrete details that would enable us to reach the aims. But Neohumanist Education really presents us with a new story, a different idea of the human, and one that's more relevant to our changing world. And if you begin to read some of the emerging work on Neohumanist Education, you'll see that we are sort of radically reconceptualizing everything from the ontological nature of the human to the epistemology, how we learn, how we can know anything, and to the ethics. Like the UNESCO vision, Neohumanism teaches young people what it means to be part of a larger ecosystem, not to stand outside it, how to see ourselves in relation, and how to cultivate a deep sense of interconnection with all species, and how to act in accordance with these values, with the idea of service, at the center of the pedagogy. But it deepens the theoretical perspectives with really practical methods for achieving these aims. So some of the uniqueness of Neohumanism is the UNESCO report doesn't talk about the multidimensional nature of the human being. The layers of the body-mind, the higher koshas, the ways to activate the aesthetic, the intuitive, the discernment. And I think that is something really special that we have to offer. The other thing is, we don't just say the human being's deeply connected with everything, but every
No. Yeah, go eat first, huh?
Go. They have to shut up their
Yeah,
microphone.
they have to
Make another co-host that can do that for you. Not at this time.
Shall I continue?
Yeah.
That everything that's taught is taught with this principle in mind. So you're not learning isolated, decontextualized facts. You really are, you're studying science or history in this new relational context. So next slide. Again, as I said, the cultivation of fundamental virtues, character development, ecological ethics, and the cultivation of love. It's like there's a lot of people have a lot of trouble thinking about values education and character education, and we're sort of out front about it. We are cultivating a particular set of values that kind of reduces to this idea of what is good, the good of all, the common good of all. So it's and I think what was exceptionally important is when Baba talked about education having to be balanced between the extroversial, learning about the external world and how it works, with the inner knowledge, learning about one's inner life. And that really is obviously very different from what's happening out there now. Next one. This I particularly like because having studied the holistic education movement for decades, I've always been a little bit sort of uneasy with the new aginess of it. You know, they tended to really go toward the spiritual, but it could end up being very dogmatic, and neglect rationality and reason. But you know, Baba was very, very sophisticated in this idea of what it means to have an awakened conscience and what kind of a liberated rationality looked like. So I think that's kind of the sweet spot that neo-humanist educators have to find, is the relationship between inner knowledge and intuition and really solid critical thinking, logic, and rationality. The other thing that's really new in terms of the holistic education movement, and I have battled for years to make this part of it, is because holistic education was always very nice. It was about flowers and love and children and music and lovely things, but it lacked the sort of critical edge that would help young people understand why we have the world that we have. You know, why we have a world that's grounded in white supremacy and post-colonialism and racism and gender bias, you know. So young people have to come to terms with those realities. It doesn't mean you can't do it in a loving way, but you need to cultivate critical pedagogy.
Making people uncomfortable.
Yes, you can get fired for that now, but hopefully that'll change in the future. And I really like the idea of service as integrated into neo-humanist education to sort of awaken that desire for social and environmental justice through actually doing things, having young people do things in the world that make a difference in people's lives. So that's very important. So I'm not sure what's on the next one, but let's go there. So just a kind of a recap. The integration of contemplative education and critical theory, blending reason, critique, and imagination, remembering that Prout is our vision of the future. It gives a framework for a vision of a future society. But neo-humanist teaching, like when we're teaching the social studies or even science and math, has to be aligned with that vision. And again, I will keep promoting this idea of decolonizing practices, because Western education has colonized the entire planet. That's what we have right now. We have Western forms of education that were developed in Prussia that have really, you know, they permeate everything in the planet. So it's a very big task to decolonize education. And I've been reading some wonderful literature, mostly from the Global South, Native Americans, African scholars, people who have really experienced what colonization has done. There's some amazing scholarship coming out of that. So I would encourage people to take a look at some of that. I think that Baba has given us an educational method, a pedagogy for moving people through the sentiments so that we can sort of help unstick things a little bit. And this idea never to forget that Ashtanga yoga and meditation are really central to the pedagogy. They aren't the entire thing, but they are central to it. And I just came across a great book, kind of a book that looks at a macro study of all the research that's been done on yoga and meditation recently. It's very good, by Daniel Goleman, who wrote the Emotional Intelligence book, who was actually a disciple of Neem Karoli Baba. So there's a yogic relationship there. But they talk about meditation as a way of transforming these altered states. I think, Rekha, you talked about the sort of highs that you can get, the moments of illumination, but the consistent disciplined practice leads to altered traits. And that's what we're after. We're not just after the momentary high that or feel good. We're after altering traits so that people can become the new humans that they need to be.
What's the name of that book?
It's called Altered Traits. Yeah, it's really quite good. It gives a lot of support. And they will admit that the research is only penetrating the top layer of what we need to know about consciousness and yoga and meditation. Because scientific research is pretty basic, like they measure heart rate and sweat and things like that. So what we have are thousands of years of intuitive science, documenting through hermeneutics and through, all sorts of ways, the actual effects of yoga. So those worlds are starting to come together, I think. Anyway, I think that the reason for my sense of urgency, and I'm share this with a lot of global organizations. I'm part of something called the Global Transition Initiative, which is a global network of scholars who say that we've entered the planetary phase of civilization, and they're sort of looking at ways we debate and publish papers on the best ideas for transition. And the next one is, and they've been very nice about publishing stuff about yoga too, which I'm really excited about. I've mentioned the Global Tapestry of Alternatives, which is a movement from the Global South mostly. And the new language now we're hearing is they're seeking an ethics-based education. And people are talking about spiritual pathways untrapped by religious dogma. I mean, who wrote this? Donna, did you write this United Nations thing? So there's also a resurgence of interest in the academic world. And one more slide. There was a recent call for books from Information Age Publishing. And I'll talk about this a little later when we talk about some of our research, not in this presentation. But they were looking for books that propose new paradigms for social and global changes that promote the integration of science and religion and the unity of body, mind, and spirit. So I sent them my book proposal for the next slide for our textbook, which is now being called Becoming One with the World, a Guide to Neohumanist Educational Practice. And they were very excited about it. So I have 3 wonderful editors from that publisher. And the book is done, so hopefully it'll be out by the end of this year. And that's about all I have to say. I hope I haven't bored you with too much old information about neo-humanism, but perhaps you feel inspired that this really is our moment here to move forward and to accelerate progress and do as much as we can to sort of bring it to more attention. So thank you. I think we have time for a discussion.
So with great, I see that there is a conservative movement going on, which is kind of trying to transform the education in a way, like forgetting about the racial issues that we have. And so do you see that as an opposing force to the Neohumanist education movement? Okay, I'm a bit hard of hearing here. So it's what an opposing force? Conservatism.
What?
Conservatism in education.
Oh my gosh, isn't it wonderful? Critical race theory being taught. It's a tragic state of affairs. I think it's a polarization. The religious right has been after public education for like 50 years. I've been tracking it for a long time. They would love to privatize schools, and they would love to get all this stuff about race and gender and sexuality out of the curriculum so that they can restore this sort of nostalgic idea of some kind of past era, and the past era was one of white supremacy, white privilege, religious privilege. Huh?
Male supremacy.
Male supremacy. Yes, no offense meant here. But it is a counterforce.
Well, again.
Not taken, it's the truth.
But I think it's a counterforce, but I think it's not a bad thing to have counterforces because it helps to clarify where you stand. And I think that's what's happening right now with the global movement, social movements and stuff. People are really clarifying where they stand. Now, I hope it doesn't lead to people shooting each other in the streets. That's always what happens when people clarify themselves. But hopefully, there'll be also a sentiment of spirituality and connection that will help bring people together. Matt, and please talk loudly so I can hear you. I'm so sorry.
All right, how's that?
That's good.
Okay, I just have two golden things to add to what you say. For me, you say indigenous rights, but for me, in my, and I think yours too, it's more about indigenous sovereignty. And there are so many movements across the planet in New Zealand and Hawaii that are like, hey, people. So I think there are, just as the oppressed that have woken up, they're kind of our leaders. The other thing I want to shortly comment is about that. I think you have to be ready to use other languages with English. There's a lot of concepts that don't go deep enough in English because of these ontologies, right?
Right.
Like in Mayan, kananka means an entity that is the whole great force.
Right.
So we need to shift our language.
That's a good point about language, and I do talk about that in the book quite a bit. Baba made a very strong point about ensuring that education took place in the local languages. So I started doing some research on language and realized that there's like 7,000 languages, many of which are about to go extinct on the planet. And what's really interesting is scholars have identified thousands of plants with medicinal value, the ethnobotanists, but their uses are only understood in one language, and that's probably one of the endangered languages. So even out of self-interest, I think we would struggle to help all languages survive and thrive. Carlos?
Thank you. Several things. First of all, there is no shortage of good people doing good things in the world, right? Sometimes we think we're the only ones, right?
Right.
The only shortage, I see two shortages. One is of us getting to know each other, the good people doing good things in different parts. And the second shortage is of collaborating with all of these folks.
Absolutely.
And when you mentioned about science and religion, I'm not sure if people here are familiar with the Baha'i faith, but they have been doing this for over 150 years,
Right.
Bringing it all together. But the other thing I wanted to say to Donna here, when you talked about irritating people, what I tell my students is, you can teach it very effectively with stimulation, but just as equally effectively with irritation. Because you have to kind of irritate them to move. The last thing I just wanted to say is this debate that has been going on for hundreds of years between, the people who believe that humans are basically evil, which is the Hobbesian view, and those that are, noble savages are basically good, Rousseau. Every economic political system that I know of in the world today goes by Hobbes. Capitalism and communism. Capitalism, they believe, people are evil or bad, and therefore they need to be controlled. So how do you control them? Well, with capitalism, with the carrot. Then communism with the stick. Right? And so I think what we bring is something different, and I think we need to emphasize that difference. I'm closer to Rousseau, although some of that stuff needs to also be worked on. But I think people are basically good. And what makes us look evil? Why is it that good people do bad things? I think we're essentially like fish out of water. You take a fish out of its environment, and it looks spastic. It looks unstill, and it looks around. And you say, "Oh, fish are weird." Put them back in their environment, and you see how gracefully they fly through the water. Right? Very graceful creatures taken out of their environment. I think with society, with agriculture, with industrialization, society has changed greatly, but humans have not. We are still basically good people. But we need to change that environment. We need to bring a little water to that dish.
Great, thank you, Carlos.
I have one question, one comment you made, which is that enough people is a matter of connecting with each other.
Yeah.
Do you have a suggestion on how to do that? But I mean, I go back to.
Oh, yeah, this is not the time for me to do that, but yes, I think we need to.
What we can sort of, the framework for advancing this idea.
Yeah, those are some of the things that hopefully that I've been trying to do.
Maybe we can use the Google platform to.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, okay. We should have some kind of a discussion for.
Yeah, good idea. I have a comment too. Just have, I have children in the school system here in North Carolina. And just like you were saying, some of these, language of humanism is coming up in the UN address and all that too, that I'm seeing that and I see all the difficult things and all the struggles in the public school system. And at the same time, so many parallels with, Neohumanism as well, with people who haven't been treated Neohumanism. So there is like a glitter of hope there.
Yeah.
And my middle school, he goes to a charter school, but it's part of the public school system, which their focus is ecology, social justice. They have all the uncomfortable and hard conversations there and encourage the parents in it. And my son is in high school here in Madison County, which definitely is more conservative. And even there, you're seeing the focus on service and in most public schools, I know that you actually do have a requirement of service that needs to be completed before you graduate and just more of the acceptance of different brains and different types of learning and really tying in that it's not, I mean, there is the test scores and standardized tests and this, stressed out teachers and all they have to do, but there is a way that they're teaching that it is looking at more how you're going to function in the world and what you're going to give, and not so much on just going to college after, but the trades. And my son goes to an early college early college high school where you can, graduate with a trade and be able to just start, so it is interesting that all that the doomsday stuff is there, but it's nice seeing teachers teach in a way that I want and that are parallel with Neohumanism, with having no idea what Neohumanism actually is.
Yeah.
So it is these little
There
dots
is a lot of hope out there. I've worked extensively in Vermont around school transformation. And in Vermont, we've eliminated Carnegie units, which is you have to sit for 4 hours in English and 4 hours in math. We eliminated that. We've eliminated grades. They're no longer required to grade students, so it's a proficiency-based system. So, and there are some lovely, lovely public schools that are small enough to where the parents, the families are involved, the teachers know everybody. It makes a huge difference. And then there are some pretty awful places in the country.
Yeah, I see that too. But there are, I was very, especially in this county, I was very blessed.
That's great.
Speaking from the area where there are terrible things happening, I will say that this book banning that's going on is one area that we had in our Cambridge, McCormick, where I stay. My advice is that our area, we got a few of us, there was only a handful of us, we got a few of us to go to the meeting where they were trying to implement the Mothers of Liberty or something, where they would work towards book banning. And we just went to the meeting, it was a civic meeting, so it was, people were polite. They just continually asked questions, gave their opinions, back and forth, and they didn't get to organize in our area. And the comment they said is we were the first county, this is South Carolina, that they had met that they didn't get to because there was so much discussion. So I think that small matters like that, that's a kind of a line you need to draw. And it's only because we're not showing up with discussion, wanting to have other thoughts, that is being allowed to take part in schools, and schools are getting book bans.
Right, you have to show up.
That's a really good point. What a great example.
I think I'm probably. If there's no more questions, I think, there'll be a lot more discussion about this, I'm sure. We'll be talking a bit about the teacher preparation program tomorrow, and I'd love to see you all there. And by the way, it's good to see you Zoom faces. I see a couple of people who've been involved with our project, Didi Tapomaya and Kalyani, and maybe some more of you out there, so hello. So thank you.
Hello, hello, and namaskar. Nice to see you all.